where we've got our next talk in our 24-hour marathon of accessibility talks for GAAP. And we've got Julie here, and I'm going to pass you over straight to Julie without much ado. I am going to remind you, though, if you've got any questions about the presentation for Julie, just tweet them to @Paciello Group, hashtag ID24, and we'll answer them towards the end of the talk. Questions, right? Thank you very much. I'm hearing a double echo. I don't know, Julie, are you playing the video as well? No? Maybe it was just on away. It's gone away now. Right. Okay. In that case, I'll pass the control over to you, or rather, I'll mute myself and turn the video off. Okay.
Don't mute yourself, Patrick. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Morning, afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. But thanks to everyone that's joined the ID24. I'm excited and humbled to be a part of this. It's a first timer, so please be kind, but actually please be tough because I've got to learn. So I'm just going to take a moment and share my screen here so we can start the talk. And hopefully everybody can see this. So my talk is called Close Encounters of an Inclusive Design. And basically it's a case study introducing IDX into a company and process. So again, my name is...
Still seeing you, sorry.
We're still seeing me?
Yeah.
Let's try this again. Thank you.
Yeah, I can see your screen now.
Perfect. Let's try this again here. No matter how many times you practice, doesn't matter when it's live. So let's try this one more time. So Close Encounters of an Inclusive Design. It's a case study introducing IDX into a company and process. So again, my name is Julie Lane. I'm a UX UI designer for a company called Terranet in Toronto, Ontario. So Terranet provides online solutions like applications for governments, financials, legal, real estate markets. One of Terranet's sort of flagship solution provides access to Ontario's land registration system. It kind of enables customers to create and submit online registrations, like a transfer or a charge of a property. It also allows for searches of titles, writ searches, locating properties by map, and things like that. So it was this product that was going through a redesign, and this was when I joined Terranet. So it was from a desktop application to a web application. And this allowed us to have the opportunity to try to incorporate accessible and inclusive design practices into the project and into the company. So there's so many details I could get into in regards to this project, but what we were going to focus on today was just a few steps, the addition of IDX principles into a smooth team process and projects. What has worked for us anyways? So where to begin? The first, this photo I have here of Richard Dreyfuss playing with mashed potatoes. It's not about mashed potatoes, but it's that idea of that you've got this goal of inclusive design, but how do we inject this into a project? Where to begin? So we started with sort of joint high-level understanding. So we had, come in with a bit of research on our own, a bit of understanding, a bit of goals, but we wanted to communicate and promote inclusive design to all stakeholders. The key here is all stakeholders. So starting from the top to the bottom to the top. And through that, you'll start to kind of find people that are, champions with you, or just understanding, or going to allow you to further this design. And then, of course, you'll repeat this as much as possible, especially with long projects. So when we talk about sort of high-level understanding, it's about joint language. So what is WCAG? When we say WCAG, what does that mean? AT devices, assisted technology devices. When we short form that, are people understanding what we mean from it? What do we mean from barriers? What do we even mean from inclusive design and way area? Ensure that we're all on the same page and understanding the same terms so we can go forward to it. And the other thing is making these concepts pretty tangible. I mean, some just require definitions, but if we can use an example, you wouldn't necessarily bring someone right to the WCAG site. You can sort of pull out the main principles and make it a bit more digestible. So it's not as necessarily overwhelming, but they still understand the main concepts. And depending on where they are, we can break those down into smaller pieces. So then we get back to also talking about the policy. So we have a joint understanding of the government policies, your corporate policies, even your project ones. So in Ontario, we have a provincial policy called AODA, which is the Accessibilities for Ontarians with Disability Act. So often we would get, apply AODA to the screen. And we would try to build that sort of understanding that this is the policy, it's not necessarily the actions and the steps that we take in order to make things accessible or to make things inclusive. Incorporate this policy, but have different actions to them. In addition, a nice sort of a larger part has to do with users and scenarios. So you've got them on the joint language, they understand the policy, but really it's about, understanding the need for this and the scenarios that affect everyone. So of course the ability ranges, showing usage and show the wide range of them, even just little clips or videos. Their environmental and social barriers, touching on, if someone's in a loud environment, if someone is at a remote location, time constraints. Even show a screen reader tool, gives them an idea of how people are interacting with it. So we also elaborated on our personas to help us kind of tell this story. And it's not designed to be like, here's Joanne and she has low vision. It's to be used in conjunction with our primary, secondary user studies. So she's a law clerk, but pulling out some explaining screens of some quotes and what gives her challenges, but also solutions that we can provide. But then also paralleling that with the law clerk persona and still bringing them through the same workflows and same goals, because that doesn't necessarily change with ability ranges. We can just provide better solutions for them to make that easier. Success and examples when talking about joint understanding. So focusing on the positives, often a lot of times companies will start to think, oh, this is going to be high cost, high effort, but explaining easy wins, talking about easy solutions, what alt text can do and how easy that is to even add. Benefits, being able to see where you are, visible focus is such a benefit for everybody. And examples of where it's been used already. So show real sites, related examples, stuff that's wind, visual walkthroughs. And statistics, if we have specific statistics, that's nice. We didn't really have anything starting out, but even some generics of just the amount of impact that this can make. So once you've got that high level sort of understanding, you started to kind of grow these members that are on board. We created a team. And this team was within the project itself. So it was a type of working group. And it needs or sort of requires each member of the project to be a member of the team. So we had someone from business, someone from development, someone from QA, and we kind of became the touch points for the whole team and stakeholders. Just meeting on a regular basis, having everybody from different areas of the project as well sort of provided different perspectives and challenges. We have the same goal, but everyone sort of has different obstacles that they're dealing with within their particular area. It also gave members of the team somebody to go and speak with, and somebody that's also dealing with very similar things that they are, raising questions to the team itself. So often we would meet when we had a list of questions or a list of actions that we were trying to solve. And that leads to obviously meeting regularly and throughout the process. So this just is an initial, it's not just when defects happens. There's a whole process that if you're meeting regularly about, you can bring yourself through the entire cycle. So now we've got that team, we've got that joint understanding, and we want to understand and define the high-level requirements. So let's just kind of start getting into a little bit of the meat. So as a group, we went through things like, of course, WCAG, the guidelines. Now, depending on your project or scope, we had a lot of reports as well. So as well as online content, we also wanted to go through the understanding of the PDF criteria. And we read WCAG. You go in and you dig deep, and maybe you didn't read every single item of it, but you really needed to have that understanding, and every team member did. And then you created that you pulled that checklist out, but understanding a little bit of the basis of that checklist. We then sort of elaborated and clarified on that criteria. So furthering that checklist, WebAIM I've put here just because it was a good source to bringing some more tangible items to each of those. But you still need to review that, and you can expand on that, and maybe your project has something specific to it. An example, if you've got the WCAG criteria, the numbers that follow it with 1.3.1, adaptable infinite information relationships, that is part of the checklist, but what does that mean? So adding things that, we require required fields to be identified, tables are only used for tabular data, that type of explanations. We also started to learn that your browser support and device support are sort of linked. So the browsers we supported the 5 major browsers. And in addition, we also wanted to provide a nice range for our users as well, and ensure that there is some usability on those. So JAWS is also a purchased screen reader. It works with IE generally. But we also wanted to supply or ensure that we had tested with NVDA, and that's free. And we also have a lot of Mac users, so that, including VoiceOver within that scope, and so on and so on. So again, pairing up the browsers, but also ensuring that range. Touching with the scope, so then moving on to the affected content. So this was one where we thought, well, we have to include inclusive design in everything. But we have to evaluate all areas of the project and see if there's any areas that, may be tough or out of scope, depending on that particular criteria. And really all that means is that we've provided an alternative for it, or we're going to put it into another project. So you review all features, from help content to landing pages and things like that. But as an example of something that was sort of descoped was, our system uses a lot of maps. So we use maps for searching, but we have alternative ways to do that. We know that there's a lot of technical limitations when it comes to making maps fully accessible. So we had to pull things out of our maps to ensure that the user has access to those. And then revisiting our whole map project, because it's a shared tool throughout a lot of our systems, we will tackle that as one whole project on itself. We also have our system accepted things like attachments, where users were attaching, say, a schedule to a legal document. And there's some technical constraints, obviously, converting that when it's being attached. We also had conversations around intent, even. If it's a legal you're providing content for a legal statement, we would need to describe it, but we couldn't really describe the intent of it because it's quite touchy. So we descope this to revisit this again at a later date and understand, a little bit more clearly about those distinctions, and some more technology that we could probably use in order to aid in that. So once you've got, again, your understanding of your sort of high-level requirements, we started to create a list of what we don't know. And that this was quite handy. One, kind of build trust with the group, too, where we were comfortable starting to say, I'm not too sure how to handle that. But it also gave us an idea of maybe where we need to reach out for help. So obviously through the analysis, you started getting questions around WCAG. We created an action list of how we were to apply this with ours, or how does this apply within our system. User questions came up quite a bit too, of how are users actually using the devices? We can watch videos and things like that, but really, how are they truly interacting with the web, the applications, and how do they navigate? So this also leads to asking for help. Once we had a large list of questions, you started to research it. So we would Google how people were using it. We'd invite people in. You'd have conversations. You'd reach out to the community. There's lots of blogs. There's lots of resources, thank goodness. We started to find that most of our questions started then becoming a little bit more implementation-based. So we actually had reached out to TPG. Mr. Billy Gregory joined in and helped us go through some real code examples to aid in our kind of quest for making this legible and usable. Reaching out to the community. So joining local meetups or organizations. They're often free. We have a great one in Toronto, Toronto Accessibility and Inclusive Design, A11YTO. But again, generally when you start finding people about accessibility, they like talking about it, and we're generally there to help. So that becomes quite crucial. So now we've got a bit more detail, and we've hopefully got some questions answered. And then again, you're going to repeat this process, but you start to apply and assess in the early designs. So we were still sort of even understanding the project, the scope, inclusive design, all of that. And so now let's sort of analyze the artifacts that we have. So we started to talk about, the style guide that we have, the colors we're using, elements, library, focus style, messaging. I can show sort of one example, but there were so many that we ended up going through where you would have debates over, let's analyze this and make this, better and better and better. So we have a lot of legal forms in our applications. And we started thinking of, well, how are we going to handle the field level errors? You've got some modals for something really crucial. You've got page level errors that might say here, there's the following errors on the page, but then bringing them to that field level, how is that best communicated? So you can see in number 1, we first started, we see this quite often, where you've got this nice, easy identifier of the X that's kind of close to the input field, and then the notice or the error message beside the field itself. But we started questioning the relationship too. Like even when you start getting down into label 3, label 4, it was starting to read together. So, label 3, there's an error, it's a required field. Label 4, is required field part of label 4? Is it part of label 2? How much spacing do you need to make that relationship clear? Number 2 sort of brought those required fields underneath to say, well, I'm not too sure, again, where is that relationship to the actual field itself? So number 3, we started thinking about how could we incorporate the message and the label together. 1, would that be confusing? And 2, or would it provide more clarity? And of course, you have to test these things as well. But this is generally where we sort of landed, because you were able to bring that relationship really clear between, yes, this particular field has an error, and breeding it into a bit of a sentence. So we also had a great dev team that decided to remove that required field indicator. So instead of it saying label 1, and then you would have that asterisk that would usually communicate that this is required as well, and then the redundancy is a required field, that would be removed when the error came, and then they would bring back the field indicator, required field indicator, after the error was removed. So they worked quite hard on this sort of little function. So we did this with mock-ups. We had, I remember Billy also discussing of, should we put the checkboxes on the right-hand side instead of the left? That discussion where you're reading from, right to left. So, maybe we should have it at the, left to right. So maybe we should have that checkbox at the end. We actually did keep it on the left, but because we also had an action menu on the right. But those type of debates and just the fact that we were questioning them, and we were questioning them early before they were actually built, it was saving a lot of time. Talking about the technical stack as well, this is important in the early stages. What components maybe already have a lot of these inherent features built in, and if they do, can we use them? So we've also got obviously a large section when it comes to build into implementation and testing. So you want to build and test and build. This could really be a talk in itself, and I'm not going to focus too much on this, but I can call out some of the main areas where we started to build it into the process. In addition, building it into agile type of workflows and things like that, you can get into stories, you can get into all sorts of things. But what we tried to do is do some development-based testing. So initially, we've kind of analyzed that design phase, that early, the mock-ups, the style guides, as much as we could kind of do that. And then when we started getting into the development, getting the developers to do a few key checks, running away reports, an automated high-level check, ensuring that the components that they created is keyboard accessible, basic read out loud behavior, ensuring that the proper alerts were put in and things like that. We discussed a lot about automation tools, when to use it, what it catches. That was also a lot of the questions that were raised that we would often bring back from consultation. AT device testing, our QA was testing with the actual devices. WCAG testing against that particular checklist, as well as any of the extra criteria that we've brought forward. Also, we started discussing about workflow testing. We're ensuring that we're catching the in-between stages and the interaction. So, if you test that particular component or you test that screen, but what about, again, bringing it back to those the user workflows? If you're going from start to finish, are there any barriers that are encountered at that point? User testing, obviously getting real users of all ability ranges. So this is unfortunately something that we haven't got to explore enough. Obviously you request all ability ranges welcome, but we're still growing, and that's an area for us improvement to get a community there. It's also good to note here that there's a lot of considerations about having the proper setup in order to do this. Ensuring there's some code, the code is to a certain point where you can test with it. Your settings, can you go out to people? Can they use their devices? Making people comfortable, ensuring that you have access and things like that. Again, could be a whole other talk. So we start getting to some primary lessons learned. So what and how to apply this to your project? So a few lessons we've sort of pulled out is, again, going back to that whole scope conversation, being high level but explicit in coverage of the project. So meaning the features that affected or descoped items. With large projects, there's often so many moving parts. So areas get overlooked, and not necessarily overlooked, but there's just so many things that are focused on. So you try to call out these features and remind teams throughout the process that this is all applicable, that, help content, any PDF we're creating to advertise this, any landing pages that connect to it, that this is all together. And that tends to help get the whole picture of it. Sometimes people tend to focus just on the UI. It requires base understanding from all team members. So this really helps the project awareness. And this goes on to, again, getting everybody on the same page. Not everyone's necessarily going to be experts, but get a little bit of this base understanding. So there's more eyes on the goal. You'll start to get more suggestions. You'll start to get more improvements. Maybe how we can better things. Cost and work efficiencies when handled from the beginning and throughout the process, not at the end. So this is probably something you'll hear repeatedly, but it's so very true. Often, especially with large projects, areas get parked. Previous fixes may not have got applied to that particular section. So you're having to go back and retrofit, and you're having to go back and retest. And obviously that retrofitting takes a lot more time and customization, and maybe it brings in some more defects and things like that. Anytime you're touching and reworking code, there's always that risk. So again, try to catch it as early as possible, and this is even before it's built. There's a large benefit of having accessibility techniques built into the technical stack. So we started finding we were really thankful of keyboard functionality already being in there. But also we're working on trying to get procurement to start making these, and maybe not guarantees, but some sort of pre-tests or confidence as part of a criteria for procuring these tools. Because customization obviously costs more, but also again that risk of error that ends up happening. So you do not want to underestimate focus management if it's required. And I know a lot of people are thinking, well, why would you even mess with it? But sometimes with applications, the focus needs to be maintained for usability. So we have a pretty robust application which has, again, a lot of forms. You're working through trees, but also even just in a scenario where, say, you are on a screen and you have actioned a modal. And this modal, which is also hard to deal with, but we did find ways around that as well. Maybe you try to avoid those, but, or action a task, if you close that task and you're brought back up to the top, you have to navigate back to where you were. So in an ideal situation, and generally this tends to be most intuitive too, is that you're being brought back to where you were actioned it from. So if it was launched from a menu, you're kind of brought back to that particular menu. This is just an example. But that does take time, and I think sometimes that's missed. And also always having that visual or visible. So using the standard HTML elements as much as possible. So there was a lot of inherent benefits with that, a less customization. Again, this sort of mirrors the same. So another great thing when we were sort of learning is that there's a lot of quality and benefits, obviously, that come from applying IDX into your company and process. It gives you a bit of a microscope to the quality code and to the usability. It gives you the enhanced user goals. So a lot of our law clerks are very savvy keyboard users. And currently with the desktop application, not everything is accessed by a keyboard. So having just that feature of being able to, save that time of moving your hand from the keyboard to the mouse, if you're able, saves quite a bit of and adds to the user experience. And then sort of lastly, just kind of keeping it going. It gets easier. The more you do it, the more you learn, the smoother it becomes, the more the company as a whole starts to talk and address it. And there's always lots to improve. We have a long way to go as well. But a big thing too is also holding on to those little successes in a sense. So when you hear a developer say something like, but what if that user could not hear this alert? Or what is the non-visual experience like? Those are little successes where, people are starting to think in those manners and those times. So I have actually spoke rather quickly through these slides. Again, this is maybe the first timer here. But I'd like to thank everyone, again, ID24, TPG, and also the team at Terranet. It's just myself here today, but it was a large group, and we were lucky to get support from many areas, which gave us the ability to learn and apply these steps. Again, this was high level. We have lots of details we could go into, or if you have questions or even shared experiences, please reach out, because we're still in this process of growing this.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
I'm just having a look here at the Twitters. Let me see. Any specific questions? No, I think you're off the hook on this one.
We could talk more about the records in the background.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Steve, just before our session, Steve was very intrigued by the background accoutrements there with all the vinyl.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much. And yeah, we're a bit early, but we'll take a little break and we'll start with the next talk at the top of the hour. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you.